Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Risk with Dr. Naveen Agarwal. Each week, we talk about a topic related to risk management of medical devices in a very casual and informal way. This is not a webinar or lecture. Rather, our goal is to talk about key topics and challenges in a very informal way and share best practices. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal, and I'm the principal and founder at Achieve, where my personal mission is to help you achieve success in risk management. My guest in this episode is Christine Somorodian. Christine is a quality and regulatory consultant with many years of industry experience. So she has seen firsthand the negative effect of poor communication and collaboration, especially among quality, regulatory, and engineering teams in the medical device industry. That is why she's the best person to discuss challenges and opportunities for improving communication and collaboration. We had this conversation as part of our weekly Let's Talk Risk live series on LinkedIn in front of a live audience. You're about to hear a recording of our conversation. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to our weekly Let's Talk Risk conversation. So excited to be with you again. So with that, guys, I'm so excited to welcome Christine Somorodian today. Christine has years of experience in the industry, and now she has started her own consulting practice. But I will let her introduce herself to you. But we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is about collaboration, cross-functional collaboration, specifically in the QA, RA, and engineering space. That's our world. That's the world we live in. And that's where we can learn from each other what are some of the challenges and best practices. So with that, Christine, welcome. Could you just please start by introducing yourself to our audience today?
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Hi.
I'm Christine Somorodian, and I've had a consulting practice in RA and QA for medical device since 2011. I mean, 2010, late 2010, 2011. And I work with companies on their journey to compliance, whether it be startups or whether it be existing firms who are having to do catch up for things like the EU MDR. And I do both regulatory and quality, and I dabble in a little clinical. So my background is I started out as what was called at the time a medical technologist. And back in those days, before very heavy automation in the laboratory, you had three categories of 5-year degree people in hospitals. One was BSRNs, nurses with a degree. One was pharmacists, and one was medical technologists. And as laboratory science automated more and more of what happens in a clinical lab, that profession got narrower and narrower. I ended up in research. I worked for a company where we developed novel assays called Frieza Biomedical. We made assays for free radical scavenging enzymes. And that was very exhilarating, and that kind of half launched me into this space of sort of medical product development, if you will. Mm-hmm. Spent a couple years in the biotech side of things, and then moved over to medical devices. And I've been here ever since, and I love it. I love the pace of change. I love the challenges, and I think it's important. What we're contributing to the world is important.
Yeah, and so much happening in our industry right now with AI, ML, and such exciting times. Christine, you're also a faculty at Washington University. Is that
not right? Faculty? I've been a lecturer at University of Washington.
Okay.
So I did go to graduate school for biomedical regulatory affairs, and I got asked back to lecture. Okay. Yeah, I did so for a number of years, and did a couple of little exciting projects. One of which was sort of evaluating the value and the what's the other word, the need for a program of this nature, especially for people who want to go into RA and QA. Mm-hmm. And that needs assessment was really exciting because it showed us that not just in Washington State, but that nationally there's definitely a need. And this professional area is only going to get more important.
Yeah, and this is picking up, and I know in our audience also today there are folks who are involved in academia, and teaching and participating in that conversation. So I'm really excited to see that happening. Okay, Christine, so let's talk about our main topic today. And before we got onto our call today, you were telling me that you were involved in a remediation situation where this kind of came home to you in terms of why communication and collaboration is important. So can you start by setting the stage for the situation and what you felt was necessary from a collaboration point of view there?
Sure. And I'll before I get to that moment, I'll just say that this is not the only remediation I've been involved in.
Uh-huh.
I hope people in the audience are laughing to themselves because this happens a lot with companies,
For sure.
following all the rules. It really depends on your leadership, and it depends on the talent you have in-house, and it depends on your history, right? So
Yeah.
kind of getting into that, this was a company that had been in existence, and they did what a lot of companies do, which is buy small companies and conglomerate, right? And I've learned over the years that one thing that typically doesn't happen during a merger, and especially during the due diligence phase, and I think this is changing now, but in the past, there was not a lot of time spent on assessing the quality system of the company that was getting purchased versus the quality system in the larger corporation and how that integration would work. And in my view, that scenario is probably responsible for some hefty percentage. I hesitate to assign a percentage number to that, but I'm going to say it's probably north of 25%.
Okay.
Of remediation projects that have to happen are because not a lot of thought by senior leadership was put into, how are we going to make these two companies with complex QMSs function together. So that was probably sort of foreshadowing some of what happened. But in this case, it seems that some engineering decisions were made around risk management for the product as they were sort of like, that early. It's hard to say, was it because we never got to ground zero? Was this the first time they did the risk analysis, or was it later on? But what happened is the specifications were so narrow, and they ended up creating a risk matrix based on these very narrow specifications. So you ended up violating your risk analysis. In this case, it was a FMEA. Just in the natural course of business.
I see. Yeah.
And also, it also involved sort of non-awareness of the supply chain constraints. So, for example, if you have a component, and you write the specification to match that one supplier that you're with, and then you change suppliers, and all of a sudden the specification shifts, right? But it doesn't really impact the functionality of the product, but now you've gone outside your specification.
Right.
So, there's an art form to doing things like writing a risk assessment, right? And it's a collaborative effort. And in this case, that didn't happen. So, the risk had to be revisited, and it was contentious because there'd been a lot of violations, and nobody was doing a great job explaining that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it has been, first of all, the scenario you're describing, I'm very familiar with that. It happens all the time. And my understanding and experience is that at an individual level, in our own jobs or responsibilities or functions, we are trying to do our very best. Engineers are designing the products the way they think it should work. Regulatory quality people are doing their work. But somehow we are not able to put it all together. And I'm very curious to hear from you, whether in this case or in general, what are some of the barriers to this sort of what we call cross-functional, cross-sector collaborations? Everybody wants to do it, but we are not able to. Why is that?
Yeah, and I am going to go more generic now because this definitely applies to the scenario I described, but it frankly applies to many scenarios I've seen, in addition to scenarios I've heard about from my colleagues, right? So I think there are some general challenges. One is, the nature of engineering itself is people like to experiment and play.
Yeah.
Engineers like to build things, and they like to have the freedom to do so in the way that they feel most creative and most effective. I guess I'd use those two words. that's one factor. It's just sort of the nature of people who are in engineering. I think another factor is regulatory affairs has evolved. We now have it as an academic discipline, but you go back 20 years and it was not an academic discipline. It was sort of learned by the seat of your pants. And if you go back farther, it was things like, how do you interpret the rules coming out of agencies like FDA? And FDA, of course, was the first to define regulations for medical devices. And so you had people who were sort of learning on the job, and the nature of the people it tended to be very quiet, introverted people who had a head for complex topics, but maybe not the greatest communicators. And they were mostly women, as a general rule. And on the other side for engineering, it's mostly men. So we had that cultural phenomenon as well. And I think there wasn't enough conversation early enough. I think engineering would tend to get just so far along in designing products before they let regulatory look at it, because regulatory was looked at as a constraint, as a roadblock, as a joy killer.
Yeah.
Going on. I've worked inside engineering teams. I've worked inside RA groups. And it's always very interesting to me. It's changing now, but I'd say 10, 15 to 20 years ago, people had very fixed ideas of who engineers were and who regulatory people were. And that's changing, thank goodness. But there was just not good communication. And there was and depending on the culture of the company, there could be a little sort of built-in animosity or friction or whatever you want to call it. And also the inability to communicate, and nobody in leadership, trying to facilitate that communication.
For sure. So lot of factors here, right? Now, I'm very encouraged to hear you say that it's changing, and it's very encouraging for me to hear that. Of course, we have a long way to go, but Christine, what do you see changing today that should make us feel a little bit more optimistic about, encouraging this collaboration even more?
Well, that's a great question. I think there's more guidance coming out on a regular basis that sort of, as a general theme, encourages collaboration. I think just the shift in society, I think more women going into engineering, and now we have more men, especially now that we have an educational structure for regulatory affairs. Yeah. I think there's more men going into RA. So I think the gender thing is helping. I think automation is helping tremendously. Yeah. We now have a lot of good EQMS functionality, and in fact, there's specific there's automated risk management tools. There's a lot happening on that front, and I think it's forcing people to take a deeper and more collaborative dive because they have tools to do so. Yeah. Great. And I hope this trend continues. I hope that through these conversations also we become more aware. You bring up many good points here, communication in gender roles and expectations and perceptions, culture, organizational structure. You bring up a lot of good points here. And I'm hoping that this awareness can help us acknowledge that, hey, it's a team sport. Whatever we do, it's a team sport. So that's a great setup. I would love to continue this conversation, guys. Those of you who are joining just now, please note that this is just a very informal and casual conversation. And this is the time I'm going to start inviting you to participate in this conversation. And all you have to do is, like Roger has done here, is to raise your hand virtually, and I'll bring you on this stage. And you don't have to wait for your turn, guys. You can raise your hand. Those of you who would want to participate in this conversation, I can bring all of you on this stage here. So, Roger, you're on. Please unmute your mic and share what you have in mind.
Good morning. And Christine, 5 minutes into your discussions about your experience, I immediately jumped on your LinkedIn profile to see if we had worked at the same companies, because I think it resonated so much. So I really had to echo that, especially the comment about purchasing specifications. I've strived so much in the companies I've worked at to get people to write requirements on what they need, not what they've already picked out, which leads to all the problems that you said. It's just crazy.
I'm glad it resonated, Roger.
Yes.
And we probably have not worked at the same place, which makes it even more hilarious.
That's right. I did look, and we have not. So, and one other thing is, at least in one of the big companies that I worked at, which was a conglomeration of largish companies, I will say, and for the longest time, they each division operated under their own quality system, and as again you talk about, one division gets into a problem warning letter situation or remediation situation, and the company, just as soon as one was done, another division got one. And the company, in that case, at least saw the light and instituted a very painful process of making everybody get under the same quality system so they could instantly shift tiger teams of people who knew what was going on in any plant because everybody operated the same way. Mm-hmm. That was one thing I saw that did help.
As you said, you mentioned, Roger, it was very painful, right?
Yes, very.
Yes. Very. So, before I invite Ed and Rafael to share their thoughts, I have a follow-up question on that, both for you, Roger and Christine. As part of remediation, of course, we are really focused on fixing the stuff and moving on. But do you see people taking the time out to say, what are the lessons learned? How can we improve in a fundamental way? Do you see that happening?
I can say that I do, and I know that many of the people I worked with through that painful period are now at other companies, and they see things the way I do, that they had maybe blinders on. As Christine said, I'm a design engineer, and I know 15, 20 years ago, I was more focused on the fun stuff and not the big picture. Going through that whole experience was painful, but you learned a lot and you appreciated the whole quality system. And I know my colleagues that are in other companies think that same way. So I know at the companies we work at, we all try to enlighten those that haven't been through the baptism of remediation.
Yeah.
I think it's getting better. And I think a lot of the communication like this forum we're talking in here, the many of the news things that come out about quality issues, I know among my colleagues that sparks a lot of discussions and a lot of thought processes on what could have gone wrong.
Great. Christine, how about you? How widely have you seen lessons learned?
So I see a mix. I do see teams coming in with more earnestness in a remediation situation of how do we get to root cause. I think it depends on leadership, and it depends on the culture, and it depends on the size of the company. I'm aware of some scenarios where, there's just the companies are so big and the leadership bucks don't stop till way at the top, and there's not really accountability at that level. And so things are not changing in some of those cultures. Even if you have people inside the organization that Roger's describing here, you can have many of those. But if there's not the will, kind of at the leadership level, then fundamentally things don't really shift. So I think it's a whole range.
Great
but
point.
I think it speaks to a growing awareness that if you bring in regulatory at the beginning of designing a product, you're going to end up with a more robust product, right?
Yeah.
We maybe we'll get into it. Maybe we'll see what other people have to say, but I'm hoping we can circle back to that topic.
Great. With that, Ed, thanks for your patience. I want to invite you now to share what you have in mind. Ed, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I need to unmute.
You got it. Thank you, Ed. Go ahead, please.
Okay. This is such an interesting story because it kind of, in a way, parallels my career in medical devices, because I started out as a supplier quality engineer. And I'd like to say I was like the people in the parade that are pushing the big trash can and the broom that are sweeping up behind the elephants. And I had to clean up problems from time to time. And I found out that about 50% of our problems were caused by us, not by the supplier. That we had not given them all the information they needed, or we didn't send them the change that had occurred, all kinds of issues. And I just happen to be teaching a purchasing class next week, and one of the parts about it is communication is important between you and the supplier. So you need to have good communication channels set up, and you need to talk to each other, and that kind of thing. And then I went later on into a manager of quality and regulatory in that same company, and I was cleaning up after a major acquisition that had occurred, and I think today all of the parts that were acquired at that point are now gone from the company that bought them because of the issues that were not adequately addressed. But we did have a really successful acquisition. I think I talked about this last week, where we had a team that included quality and regulatory that went in to do the initial assessment of the company that may be acquired. And the result of that project of going in and assessing the company was a plan for the first 100 days of after the acquisition started for what activities were going to be taking place, what resources were needed, and we were forced to assign resources to the company we were acquiring. So I had to send one of my quality managers to that site, and he spent 3 months working there. And we went through that plan, and we addressed all of the issues, and it was the smoothest thing I'd ever seen because of the way that had occurred. So the collaboration, the working together as a team is all very important, and we have to eliminate the silos that exist in companies today.
Sure.
So this has been a very informative and helpful presentation, Christine. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
Welcome. Yeah, and I think quality plans, just real for a second, I think quality plans are an underutilized tool.
Yes.
So a quality plan can be used in different ways. There was an emerging standard on quality plan that seems to have been withdrawn. I'm not sure what the status of that is. If somebody knows here, hive mind, please share. But quality plans can be used to solve a problem that you don't feel is really a CAPA in terms of violative nature, or a quality plan can be used at the other end of the extreme to manage numerous CAPAs. I've seen it used that way as well, where you have like 4 or 5 CAPAs that are necessary, and they're somewhat related, but they have different goals, if you will, and you can use a quality plan to manage. It's kind of like a project management document with some teeth.
Yeah, it seems to me, Christine, that to build a quality plan, you'll have to bring people together anyway. And that could also facilitate more collaboration. So great point there. Rafael, thanks for your patience. I want to invite you now to share what you have in mind. Please go ahead, unmute your mic.
This whole thing about being cross-functional really appeals to me because as someone who spent the last 10 years in medical device risk, largely, again, as Ed mentioned it and yourself mentioned, learning it by the seat of my pants, I came into it as a hearing aid specialist in a company trying to get a basically an automated home audiometer, a 510K. So my question is more general, because you mentioned one way startups often expand is by acquiring others. So with that in mind, what is the main thing you could see a startup doing to make their quality system integrate better with either what they acquire, or the flip side, if you're being acquired, what can you do to make your quality system integration go better?
Yes, I think they're two different things. They have common threads, but I think they're two different things. So for startups, this is an ongoing conversation I have on a regular basis that people who are founders and entrepreneurs don't necessarily understand why they need regulatory inputs early, and they need them very early, and they need commercialization inputs early. They need to understand. So so first of all, when you're setting up a QMS for a startup, it's a partial QMS. They don't need 2/3 of the elements of a manufacturer. So you basically you need to get figure out how you're going to do risk, because you have to start that almost right away, and you need to of course have an awareness of what the design controls are, and have the goal of getting to the point where you're going to control your design, even though you can have sort of a pre-design. And there's lots of people who get into this topic with more depth. I've heard Michelle Lott talk about this phase of design controls. It's sort of like pre-controls, but of course supplier management is key. And so, in fact, there's a consultant out there who's started a startup now, but before she and our husband started their startup, we were having this big conversation about the fact that people would refer to both of us in their case for commercialization pathway and spec development. And for me, it was sort of RA and sort of the beginnings of a QMS, right? We'd get these founders and entrepreneurs referred to us, and we'd have our little free 30-minute or 1 hour or whatever we're doing, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, thank you very much. We'll get back to you when we have money." It's like, no. Right. You don't understand. If you want to actually get to market, you need to build in money to talk to us now. And so where we landed was we needed to educate the investor communities. That's a whole different conversation we can get into, but it was like, no, they weren't getting the message.
But I don't want to lose that, Christine. I don't want to lose that point, because you made a good point about now reaching out to the investor community as well to make them appreciate, hey, what it might take to get to market. Guys, we are running short on time, but I do have another request from somebody to join us. Alex, looks like you are requesting to speak, and I don't say no to anybody, even though you may be raising your hand at the very last moment. We'll go into that. But I think what I will do now, guys, is just try to give Christine maybe 1 or 2 minutes to think about a couple of key takeaways that she can share with us. Like always, time flies, right? So let's just have that moment to process this conversation, Christine. But in the meantime, guys, I'm going to share with you just a few announcements. First, next week, we are not going to have our session planned as we always do every week. But next week, I have a personal commitment, so I won't be able to make it. We'll continue the week after. So you will see the announcement come out on LinkedIn. But this is a regular weekly feature for those of you who are joining for the first time. And if you're interested in these conversations, you can just mark it on your calendar. At 11 a.m. Eastern, we meet. And it's not very complicated, but can be confusing. You have to join this session through the LinkedIn event. There's no registration, there is no email, there is no appointment that is being sent out to you. But if you if you register through LinkedIn event, it'll remind you. Finally, if you miss any of these events, the recordings are available on the Let's Talk Risk website. I have given you a link on this event page. You can sign up and be updated. So with that, Christine, I'll invite you to just share 2 or 3 key takeaway points from our conversation today.
Sure. Thanks, Naveen. Sorry for stepping on your toes there. I'm not familiar with this format yet. Yeah, I think that the main things I'd like to send people up to think about are, RA is your friend. Talk to them early. If you're in engineering, literally go meet people. If you're in a physical office, I don't know who's in a physical office building anymore, but that's a good thing to do. So the earlier you have, so supply chain and RA involved, and of course, in a project, we're talking about a development project, the better. The earlier, the better. You'll have a smoother course. And I think, in the case that Edwin Bills was talking about, when you're trying to do an acquisition, get RA and QA involved and write a quality plan. I think quality plans are great. And it doesn't have to be QA or RA that initiates the quality plan. Certainly an engineering team could say, hey, we want one, and then collaborate together on it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those very crystal clear comments, Christine. I think we can remember this from our discussion today. So guys, here we are. 30 minutes have flown by. I really appreciate you guys showing up every week and attending these discussions. Thank you to all of you. Thank you, Christine, for giving us your time and your insights. Excuse me. And thanks, Ed and Roger and Rafael, for sharing your thoughts. With that, guys, have a good weekend ahead, and we will connect once again in a week from now. So no session next week, but we will connect in a week from now. Take care, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.